Ken Cross, and I'm running for the office of President of the United States. The topic of today's video is national security. First, I will address nuclear armaments. Around the time when Ronald Reagan signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with the Soviet Union in 1987, Reagan said, "We need to rid the world of these god-awful weapons." Reagan knew that having a world with an arsenal of nuclear weapons 10 times great enough to destroy all life on Earth was dangerous and imprudent. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan in 1945 were 15 kilotons. The U.S. now has nuclear bombs in service that are 1,100 kilotons each, over 70 times more powerful. A prevalent argument is that nuclear war would be so destructive and unthinkable that it will never be fought. However, there is little doubt that Hitler would have used nuclear weapons if he had had them. The United States itself used them, in fact, to end World War II. There are now approximately 14,000 nuclear bombs around the world. The United States needs to take the lead in nuclear weapons disarmament. There is plenty of destructive capacity in the world with conventional weapons without spewing radioactive material all over the earth. The United States cannot have thousands of powerful nuclear bombs in service and expect to tell other sovereign nations they can't have any. If the situation were reversed, we would not allow other nations to tell us what to do. The United States needs to lead in ushering in an era of cooperation in order to take Ronald Reagan's advice and rid the world of these god-awful weapons before the unthinkable someday happens and our planet is destroyed or severely damaged. As president, I would pledge to not be the first to fire a nuclear weapon. I would also promote verifiable reductions in nuclear armaments worldwide. The United States needs to focus attention on the national defense. The preamble to the Constitution lists one of the reasons for establishing the Constitution to provide for the common defense. The idea was to develop a strong national defense to protect against foreign invasion to U.S. soil. Our nation's early leaders believed in strong national defense. Nevertheless, in his farewell address, George Washington advised our country to avoid foreign entanglements. In recent times, however, our nation's politicians have been inclined to either initiate or participate in frequent foreign conflicts. The Islamic State has no Air Force, no Navy, and a questionable army. Yet the heavy bombing of Syria by Western Europe, Russia, Israel, and the United States has destroyed many buildings in many cities in Syria, disrupted food, water, and energy supplies, and contributed greatly to the current Syrian refugee immigration problem. Every time a woman or child is killed in a bombing raid, it is easier for the Islamic State to recruit members. I talked recently with a man who said that the United States should fight ISIS whether the U.S. citizens want to or not, because ISIS is brutal and has beheaded people. I pointed out that Saudi Arabia had recently beheaded a religious cleric for criticizing the government. I asked him if we should attack Saudi Arabia. He said yes. I said that citizens are abused in many nations in Africa, and asked them if we should attack those countries as well. In addition, a Christian woman was recently sentenced to death in Pakistan for religious blasphemy. Should the United States attack Pakistan or China for persecution of dissidents? Most of the rest of the world does not have a constitution as good as ours. The world did not vote for the U.S. to rule over it, and we cannot go to war with every nation that does things that the U.S. disagrees with. When any people of the world do not have freedom and justice due to oppression, they must be willing to fight against that oppression. Otherwise, another faction will rise up to oppress them again. People around the world have to have the courage to fight their own battles. The risk of terrorist attacks on U.S. soil greatly increases with U.S. overt military intervention around the world. Right now, the United States is opposed to the two strongest groups in Syria, the Islamic State and the Assad government. Those two groups are in conflict with each other, and both dislike the United States. The United States is therefore at risk of terrorist attacks from both groups. If we weaken one of the major Syrian factions that we are opposed to, we are by definition strengthening the position of the other faction we are opposed to. Animosity between Sunnis, Shiites, and other religious groups has led to atrocities in the Middle East for many centuries. By interfering in their disputes, the United States is at much greater risk of terrorist attacks on American soil. If Syrian factions want to fight, let them fight and be angry with each other, not the United States. A survey conducted by Brookings entitled American Public Attitudes Toward ISIS and Syria revealed the following. 78% of Americans believe that either the U.S. is unlikely to defeat ISIS, or that even if the U.S. does defeat ISIS, ISIS will return as soon as the U.S. pulls out. I agree. Also, 72% of Americans said the U.S. military should not fight Assad's army in Syria. I agree. Fighting Assad's army would tend to strengthen the Islamic State position. I believe that U.S. financial resources would be better spent on the national defense rather than the national offense. National defense investments could involve enhancements to our capabilities to detect and destroy foreign ballistic missiles in space if attacked. In addition, there are many important infrastructure improvements that should be made here in the United States to strengthen our national defense preparedness, including roadways, airports, waterways, bridges, ports, and other projects. Typically, after the United States bombs other countries, it spends large amounts of U.S. taxpayer dollars rebuilding the country it just bombed. At least $36 billion was spent rebuilding Iraq after the Iraqi War. That money could have been spent here on our own national defense, including infrastructure projects. Would like now to make a comparison between candidates. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have said that they would increase the bombing in Syria if elected president. Donald Trump even said that he would take oil that belongs to Syria, which would certainly draw the U.S. into war with the Syrian army. Unlike the leading Republican and Democratic candidates who want to escalate U.S. military activities in the Middle East, I would limit U.S. involvement to supplying weapons and military advice to Syrian freedom fighters. In conclusion, the safety of the American people would be by far greater if national politicians would focus on the defense of our country here at home rather than in raging Middle East Islamic religious fundamentalists with overt military operations over there. Most Americans believe, as I do, the Islamic State will still exist in some form after the United States leaves the region. 72% of Americans say the United States military should not fight Assad's army in Syria. Yet many political figures, including Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, want to escalate U.S. military activities in Syria. Apparently, they have forgotten that American politicians work for the American people in our republic. As your president, I will not forget. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.